Hi, all. Welcome to this series of lectures on psychology. And in this lecture, we shall be discussing the first chapter of the series, that is Nature, Scope, and Methods in Psychology. Psychology is no doubt one of the most exciting domains, bodies of knowledge, um, which has a very far reaching scope of application, observations, experiments, derivations, conclusions, theories, and its application is it cuts through all the silos of other bodies of knowledge, and it has an application seamless. Uh, Okay, so let's take a deep dive into the basics, the origins, the definitions, the initial observations in psychology. Uh, so, as you may agree, psychology is a scientific study of behavior and mental processes, where it tries to understand, observe, reason out the very behavioral tendencies of the mankind, and tries to generalize the specific observations across the board, and attempts to derive meaningful conclusions from the specific experimental observations. Like you can see here, say one of the early experiments in psychology. As you can see, there was a this refers to an incident in the United States of America, where a pizza chain of restaurants had, in tie-up with a school, they had initiated a program wherein, as a measure to encourage, to motivate the students to play, to solve problems, to play mathematical games. They agreed with the school that whoever solves these mathematical puzzles problems, or whoever plays more, they would get a certificate from the school, and in turn, when the student produces the certificate in at the store, at the pizza store would deliver a pizza free of any charges to that student. And that that understanding went on for years, and students were seen to be motivated, to be driven, to be excited over the arrangement, and the school had observed that there was a steep rise uh, in the students' participation levels, in the number of students who participated in playing the mathematical games. The reason, obviously, the pizza, and this experiment by these interventionists, the researchers, had resulted in something that they named later as the law of effect. What does it mean? Law of effect is a fundamental observation into the behavior of an individual, that suggests that you are likely to repeat your behaviors which are rewarded, and you are likely to inhibit those behaviors, or to discontinue those behaviors of yours which are punished or penalized. So what you do depends upon uh, upon the consequences. So that's one of the basic reasonings that draws a meaningful logical conclusion about the behavioral tendencies of an individual. Likewise, likewise, there was another experiment in a school, um, wherein the school had decided to the school, with the help of researchers, interventionists, psychologists, had run an experiment wherein, unlike the previous setup of the experiment, in this experiment the school had divided the students into two categories, and they were made to sit into different rooms. Now, what was happening here? In one room, so the students in both the classrooms were given to solve problems, mathematics, and the difference in the two rooms was the students in one room were rewarded for solving the mathematics. For every set of problems they solved, there was a reward declared, and they were rewarded as they solved. And in another room, there was no such arrangement, right? And what you see as a graphical representation here is about those students who were um, who were enjoying the reward of solving the mathematics problems. As you see, the graphs, when there was no rewards, or the baseline performance of the students was observed with the graph that you see on the leftmost. And when there was a reward program, you can see there was a steep rise in the level of participations. It went somewhere from 15 to 30. Uh, that is the duration for which the people were solving the problems. And then, to the same category of people, when the researchers, the experimenters, pulled out the reward program, when they stopped, when they discontinued offering the rewards, you can see the rightmost graph shows a steep decline in the number of minutes that they had spent in solving the problems, which justifies the fact that the dependency on on the other hand, when they had observed the students who enjoyed no reward, who just went on solving the problems just for the pleasure of it, just for the interest of it, they kept on. They showed hardly any change throughout the duration of the experiment. And hence this experiment had shown that it may not be very favorable, may not be very friendly to uh, to let individuals depend too much on incentives, too much on external sources of motivation, and it justifies it rather over justifies that the behavior of certain person is depending on an external stimulus or external factor, source of motivation, which when stops, the performance would decline. So here this experiment helps us in understanding that all of us, people, give any given sample of people can be broadly classified into people driven by two sources of motivation. Those who are driven by themselves, they don't need to depend on pizzas or an external reward. They're just driven by themselves. They are interested in something, they're passionate about something, they are excited about something, and they keep pursuing it irrespective of rewards, recognition, or the consequences. Whereas the other category of people, as seen through this graphical representation, the experiment reasons out that their performance depends on an external source of reward, which over dependence on which may not be very healthy in long run. Okay, so that was an interesting observation that we got to see um, in the experiment, that reasons out and that conceptualizes the aspects like intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, and over justification of extrinsic motivational factors through this experiment. Okay, that calls us for. Okay, so that's a summary of the application of psychology, which is so broad, which is so boundaryless, which cuts through the silos of various functions, various spaces, various domains, as you can see through these diverse images. So, psychology has a contribution to make to whichever, may it be workplace, may it be social space, may it be domestic space. As you can see, parental care, how are the kids going to show up when they grow up, largely depends on what is the quality of their upbringing, what is the contribution of the parents, how are they, what are the best practices that the parents have offered to the kids, and hence how they show up, how they demonstrate the kind of conduct, behavior, manners, characteristics, qualities, personality that they make for themselves, largely can be reasoned out by the kind of parental care that they receive. And at the end of the day, it's all about the behavior and the mental processes running at the back of the parents and the kids. Likewise, drug dependency. How can you deal with the drug dependency or over dependency of individuals on a certain drug to inducing sleep, inducing peace, inducing tranquility, inducing, you know. So that's an area. Likewise, infant care. While parent care is about raising the kids all through infant care, who is the preferred parent between the dad and mom? That's a study in itself, where psychology has its reasonings, its contribution, to understand as to who does better when it comes to caring for infants. Likewise, trauma. You know, when an individual goes through an immensely, intensely painful episodes in life, what could be the ways of dealing with the situation, helping the individual come out of the situation, and what could be the various interventions that psychology offers, and hypnosis can be one way of trying to condition the individual, trying to handhold the individual, and put the individual through a series of conversations, and try to uplift the individual from the state of trauma to a near normal state. Likewise, if you look at the finance sector, you know, things like the stocks, stock prices, stock behavior, the rising and falling of the stocks, most of the things, when you see the way the market behaves, as they say, it depends on the sentiment of the investor, sentiment of the share buyer, seller, the market sentiment, right? And sentiment is about emotions, and emotion is a concoction of both the cognitive tendencies and the emotional behavior of individuals, and hence psychology has its road paved into behavioral finance or investor psychology, investor behavior, and we get to see a lot of application of psychology therein too. Likewise, consumer behavior, right? That's a huge domain, in the domain of marketing. What prompts a consumer to behave the way he or she does? You know, why does somebody indulge in shopaholism, or shopping of too much, or who reacts to which products in what way? What should be the pricing of your product? Will you be making a smooth entry with the kind of price and packaging that you are having for your product into the market successfully or not? It's extremely important to understand the behavior or the psychology, the psyche of consumers, before you launch a product into the market, right? Likewise, in the professional space, you have employees of all kinds, and some of them may be really difficult to deal with. Tough people. They could be disobedient. They could be deviants. They could be you know, they could be what do you call it? They could be individualistic and not very team oriented, and hence it's essential for the managers or the leaders to know, to understand how to deal with this set of employees who are rather difficult, rather tough to deal with. What could be the means, ways, tactics, tricks, um, to deal with them and bring them on track into a desirable conduct and behavior? Stress is another thing of contention that is seamlessly spreading into the spaces. It could be workspace, as the image shows. It could be personal space, social, domestic space, and how to deal with it. Right. That's another area that has gained a lot of prominence in the recent past. Likewise, drug abuse. People in the practice of narcotics or consuming the forbidden drugs is a major issue that the society is grappling with, and psychology has its own opinion, its own submission, its own contribution to deal with the situation through the process of counseling or clinical interventions or behavioral therapies. So, the point we are trying to make from this slide is psychology is one domain which is not confined to a particular space, and it has its application throughout the multiple spaces that all of us belong to, are surrounded by, and hence it demonstrates its widespread application across the domains. Okay, that takes us to the next slide. Okay, so as we said, we have discussed of various spaces, various situations in which we get to see the psychology being applied, and one such condition or a couple of such conditions that we get to see here. Say, for instance, Oliver Sacks is a neurologist who had spent almost his lifetime in understanding various mental conditions, mental abnormal conditions, and one of which is a condition that he had captured in his book, very interestingly titled, as you can see here, "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat." That's the title of a book you would actually get to see, and the whole book is about a bunch of illustrations which deal with a mental condition called prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia, how would you define that? A condition where an individual struggles to recognize faces or can't interpret facial expressions and the cues that the other person is trying to convey, and it happens usually because of the brain damage. So, though psychology is not an absolute medical science, but it definitely has its contribution, its own submissions to reason out certain behavioral tendencies that arise out of the medical conditions, right? So, likewise, if you look at the childhood years, the initial years of growth of an infant, a very interesting condition was observed through an experiment. As you see the images on the top, the two images, the childhood image and the graphical representation. So the graphical representation is the result of an experiment wherein a bunch of students in a school were taken through an experiment, a survey-based experiment, wherein the kids were asked a few questions about their siblings, as to siblings in the early life when they were born, when they were just born, and there were a few questions put, and the graph that you can see here is when the subject's age. So the x-axis denotes the age groups 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 9, 9 plus. And whose age group is this being talked about? Age group of the subject who is being questioned about his or her sibling. So as you can see, the y-axis measures the number of questions that were successfully answered by these subjects. So what it suggests is when the subject was of age group 1 and 3, the number of questions answered by him were, were lesser. And for some strange reason, 3 to 5 is even lesser. Whereas when it comes to uh, the age group 7 to 9 and 9 plus, which means when the subject's age was between 7 and 9, and more than that, when his or her sibling was born, he could recall many incidents that about his sibling, and he could actually answer more questions than those subjects who were of the age 1 and 3 when his or her sibling was born. So all these observations are leading us to a very natural condition. We can't call it a medical condition, but it is a natural condition that each one of us has got through in life, which is referred to as childhood amnesia, which means after we grow up beyond 4 and 5, we hardly tend to recall all those incidents in our life that had taken place before the age of 3 or 4. And that's a natural phenomenon reasoned out by psychology and coined it as childhood amnesia. Another observation, as you can see, um, the kid in the image in a little aggressive behavioral tendencies. Now, this reasons out whether the exposure or overexposure of kids to aggressive uh, movies or aggressive seasons, aggressive television content or movie content, does it have an impact on one's behavior, right? So psychology, again, a branch of psychology, has its own observations to reason out that the exposure to aggressive content on television or movies definitely has an impact on the behavior on the kids. And there was a classic experiment conducted on this where like they bifurcate the groups in the school's experiment. In this experiment, they had they had divided the group of kids into two groups, and each group was taken into a room with a movie being played. But the difference was, in one room the movie played was non-aggressive, peaceful, and in the other room a movie that was aggressive, that had a lot of violence in it, was played. And soon after the movie, all the kids were sent into another common room where uh, they had a lot of toys. Some of the toys had to do with violence, like the gun, knife that you see the kid is brandishing in this image, and the other tools were plain toys, which has uh, not much to do with aggressiveness. And it was very clearly observed that the kids who were exposed to the violent movie, aggressive movie, had categorically picked up the tools that had to do with violence and aggressiveness, whereas the kids um, that watched the other movie did not make such a categorical choice, which in turn is reasoned out as about the impact of what you are exposed to in your childhood is most likely to reflect in the grown up, in the matured, in the advanced years of the individuals. If we have a disturbed childhood with a lot of violence around us, parents or the people around us indulged in violent behaviors in the childhood, it's quite likely that the kid is going to pick up the aggressiveness in the behavior, and it's quite likely that it reflects in the behavior in frequent spells, as compared to those who had relatively less exposure to violence and aggression. Are those not very interesting, exciting conclusions that psychology makes about the various realms of life? Okay, so that takes us to understand the very basics, the beginnings, origins, and the debates that had developed around psychology. Um, as you see, there's a classic debate between nature or nurture, that is, whatever personality that we groom of ourselves when we grow up, is it the result of the genetic composition that we inherit from our parents, from the family lineage, or is it the result of the surroundings that we we are a part of, the upbringing that we experience, the school that we attend, the society that we are exposed to, the friends that we make, the neighborhood that we live in, the school that we attend, the teachers who contribute to. So, all these factors that we just called out, the society, neighborhood, family, school, friends, relatives, acquaintances, etc., is a part of nurturing your personality, developing, grooming it as we keep growing, which concretizes, which solidifies, which strengthens, which shapes into certain form once we grow up. Whereas nature is about what we are inheriting, the genetic composition, the qualities and characteristics, the resemblances that we naturally inherit from our parents and family lineage. Which one is the predominant source of um, the personality, one's personality, that reflects in the behavior of an individual, whether it is nature or nurture, has always been debated, and the debate will go on. However, we must realize that there is a contribution, there is a remarkable contribution of each of these components. How much is contributed by which one is a thing of debate, is a thing of research, which doesn't have a very clear answer. But then the observation suggests that neither of these two components is to be discounted in terms of its contribution to nature, to the grooming of the personality. And one of the views that you get to see in the images below, there was this gentleman that belonged to 17th century, called Edwin Locke, who had proposed this theory called tabula rasa, which in Latin, which when translated to English, it means a clean slate, tabula rasa. And what Edwin Locke meant by his theory of tabula rasa is that when the person comes in and takes birth, his mind is an absolute blank slate, and all that he accumulates through the exposure, through his or her exposure to society, um, and the brought up, is what fills this slate, that is the mind, with those qualities, characteristics, and that makes it a personality of an individual. So clearly, Edwin Locke was of the view that supported the nurture part of personality. However, that's just a view, and nature has its own importance, significance in the making, in the grooming of personality. Okay, so those are the gentlemen that you see on the images who have some of the remarkable contributions they have made to the body of knowledge called psychology. That's worth understanding, discussing at this point of time. So these are the various schools of psychology that contributed to the body of knowledge immensely, and that gave it a shape, a structure, a flow, and certain sequence, certain understanding about the subject and its significance to the society, mankind, in the various realms of life, right? So it all started with Edward Titchener, the first generation researcher, one of the pioneers to reason into the subject of psychology, who had emphasized on this practice of this aspect of structuralism. So who forwarded the idea of the importance to understand the structures of a human mind, human brain, and where this comes from. You must understand that the world around psychology was going through certain developments during that time, and the larger part of the world around psychology also was was seriously engaged in understanding the structures of their respective domains. Like, for instance, chemistry. So, chemistry was trying to understand the structural aspects of an atom, a molecule, an element, a compound, a complex compound, um, and that resulted in a lot of understanding about the chemical behaviors of the elements around us, right? So the psychology, the body of knowledge called psychology, must have borrowed the uh, the approach to thinking, reasoning from the various domains around us, and Edward Titchener and the likes of Edward Titchener had thought that it is extremely important to understand the structure of the brain in order to understand the various mental processes that we experience, we go through, and hence probably reasoning can be made more conveniently. So, and that was followed by, so you can see there was a sequence of development of various phases to understand the psychological reasoning of behavior, of the mind and behavior of an individual. So, structuralism was followed by functionalism, which was promoted, as you see, by William James. So, he argued that it was, we have to go beyond structuralism. It doesn't stop there. It doesn't help us much in just understanding the structure of the brain. Um, okay, we understand there is a cerebrum, there is a cerebellum, there is a cortex, there is a limbic portion, there is an amygdala, there is a hippocampus. So what are the functions of each of these, and how do they contribute? How do they help us in understanding the reasoning of the behavior? So William James emphasized on the functionalism aspect of the brain, which pushed the entire endeavor to understand psychology an inch ahead, one step ahead, and that was sequentially further taken up by John Watson, whose emphasis was, now having understood the structure, having understood the function, now let's come out of the individual. While structuralism, functionalism were more about inside the individual, inside the brain. Now, when you reason out the brain's structure and function by virtue of the behavior of an individual, how does it look? So, John Watson brought out the concept and practice of behavioralism, which started reasoning out the um, human behavior by virtue of, or in relation to the structure and the function of the brain, that helped reason out many things more clearly. And then there was another a sweep of understanding, a completely different take on, while structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, they appear to be falling in absolute sequence, understandable as to why they are falling the way they are falling. The next school of thought was a complete surprise and an absolutely exciting area in psychology, which was promoted by Max Wertheimer. He brought in the view that though all of us may be having the structures and functions of the brain, and we may be tend to behavior which is influenced by structures and functioning of the brain, but each one of us is unique. Each one of us has his or her own view of, or own take of looking at the world, and he had promoted the idea of subjectivism. Though we all have brains that function, we all have certain behavior, but behaviors are unique, right? So, for instance, subjectivism was promoted through his theory called Gestalt. Gestalt is a German terminology which doesn't have a direct translation into English, but the closest word that can explain Gestalt in English is spaces. how you look at the space, how you perceive a space. So, for instance, the image that you see above the word gestalt, what do you see there? Well, some of you might guess that there is a flower vase, which is black in color, or some others of you might see it as two white faces whose noses are facing each other with you know in the white backdrop, so in the black backdrop. So how do you perceive, how you organize, how you look at a space varies from an individual, that is a subject to subject. So the views are mostly subjectivists views, and there cannot be an absolute view that you can confine entire reasoning into, right? So if you consider the black as backdrop, then you see two white faces opposite each other. Or if you consider white as the background, you would see a black flower vase standing there, and that's two ways. And hence, we must appreciate the fact that when we are exposed to the same source of stimulus, 10 of us might form 10 different views, or at least more than one view, which is so subjectivist, which differs from person to person. We have our own unique reasoning, unique interpretation, unique understanding, and we come out with hence unique observations. So, which was promoted by Max Wertheimer in his theory, Gestalt's theory of psychology. And there comes one of the most celebrated thinkers in psychology. Must have heard of his name, even those who are not quite familiar with various concepts or the knowledge of psychology. Sigmund Freud is a name that became extremely popular because of his very many exciting interventions, his initiatives, his approaches to deal with his patients, understanding their situations, their conditions, and putting them to various deep conversations, which he would call as free fall conversations, where he would just give them an open-ended question and allow them to talk, and he would keep recording the observations from the patients talking, and he derives his own submissions, his own conclusions, his own inferences about what he feels about the patient, what can be derived from the kind of reasoning that the patient is submitting, which was all reasoned out in his take on psychology, which he called as psychoanalysis. So those five are five fundamental bases that contribute to most of the subject of psychology at the origins: structuralism by Edward Titchener, functionalism by William James, behaviorism by John Watson, Gestalt theory by Max Wertheimer, and psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud. Okay, that was a quick understanding of where it comes from and from who it comes, and what would each of those mean about the subject of psychology. That takes us. So that gives a quick view about various perspectives. As we just discussed from Wertheimer's point of view, it's all absolutely relative. It's perception based. Each one of us has certain perspectives. So the body of knowledge called psychology can be seen through various perspectives. Though it is one body of knowledge, though it is one area of domain, but each of these relatively close areas to psychology has its own contribution, its own take, its own understanding about psychology. And those perspectives, the areas where psychology draws various perspectives from, can be identified as biological, which is more about what you saw in Structuralism by Edward Titchener, biological, which reasons out into the biological composition of the neural structures of a human brain, explains clearly as to the, the, the various design structures and the functionalism of the various parts, which contributes to the thinking and the behavioral tendencies of an individual. Likewise, behavioral, as we had seen various experiments conducted with movies, pizza, etc. Behavioral aspect of behavioral perspective is when you are coming out of the neural structures and functions, you are getting into the behavioral aspect to understand, to reason out why does a consumer behavior in certain way, why does an investor behave in certain way, why does a kid behave in certain way, why does a disturbed adult behave in certain way, what causes depression, what causes drug abuse, what prompts me to indulge into binge shopping, or what could be the causal factors for obesity, or why does one go starkingly thin on a food diet. So all these are various areas where we are trying to reason out as to what could be the reason behind certain behavioral tendency of an individual. Cognitive perspective, where we are trying to reason out various mental processes of an individual, which emphasize on certain part of your brain where you are running various cognitive mental processes, which would range from things like you read or you write, you think, you observe, you memorize, you recall, you analyze, you compare, you calculate, you evaluate, all these mental processes that you run through a piece of information you come across, and you reason out your cognitive capabilities or cognitive tendencies, which have more to do with your learning, intelligence, and memory, basically, and that is contributed to by the cognitive perspective of psychology. Psychoanalytical, as we just discussed a short while ago, which was largely contributed to by Sigmund Freud, comes up with his own understanding on personality and how a personality can be split into various components, which he calls as which he names the three broad components of an individual's personality as id, ego, and superego. We shall take a deeper dive into each of these when we are discussing the relevant chapter. At this point of time, we need to understand the psychoanalytical perspective is one of the most celebrated, most popular perspectives in psychology that was contributed by Sigmund Freud. Subjectivists' view, as emphasized by, as reasoned out very well by Gestalt theory by Max Wertheimer, where it suggests that though we all come with the same software inside, but the way it functions, the way it operates, the way it prompts us to behave is unique from individual to individual, and hence subjectivist's point of view or perspective is extremely important to reason out the behavioral tendencies in psychology. Okay, so while those were psychological perspectives, that is, the various areas, various domains through which you can understand various aspects of psychology, and that takes us to various branches. So once you draw your perspectives to form the body of knowledge called psychology, what are the various branches that the body of knowledge splits into? What are the various areas, subdomains that psychology has split into? So broadly, they've been classified as basic academic areas and the application or the practice areas. As you can see, there are domains like developmental psychology, which is more about studying and understanding the various stages of development of a human, right from the birth to infancy to childhood to adolescence to adult to full grown adult to advanced ages to old age, the various phases that an individual, a human being, witnesses through the life, and this branch reasons into the various behavioral tendencies one tends to demonstrate through each of these phases and the factors underlying the behavioral tendencies. Likewise, child psychology, as the name suggests, reasons out the various behavioral tendencies of kids of certain age. Social psychology. As you see yourself as a part of the people and the spaces around you, the society around you, how do you relate to the people around you? How do you see yourselves in relation to the spaces, the social spaces around you? What is the type of personality that you can be labeled as, whether it is introvert, whether it is extrovert, whether it is judging, whether it is intuitive, whether it is perceptual. So all those tendencies of personality in relation to the spaces that one belongs to is well reasoned out in social psychology. Abnormal psychology, as a name again suggests, when when someone is demonstrating certain behaviors which are deviant, which are in deviation from the normal, predictable, expected course of behavior, we call it abnormal psychology, and in the body of the domain called abnormal psychology deals exclusively with those tendencies which are in deviation from, like psychopathic behavior, or the anxiety spells, anger spells, depression, or any such deviant behavior is discussed and reasoned out in abnormal psychology. Cognitive psychology, as already mentioned, described, the various cognitive mental processes, mental functions that we are equipped with. Reasoning of the cognitive functions of an individual is discussed in cognitive psychology. Likewise, when you come to the application area of psychology, you can have various applications like clinical psychology, which essentially deals with the mental conditions, where you go ahead with where the psychologists or the certified clinical psychologists roll out their interventions to address a particular condition, mental condition that the students or the people face. It could be, the conditions like autism or depression or spastics. So where it needs an expert's hand holding to understand the behavioral tendencies to improve the condition. Counseling, as you may be aware, where the person is going through a particular situation, a phase in life, or which needs certain support systems, certain assistance, certain guidance, an expert's opinion, where a certified counselor can make an intervention into make a intervention with a hand holding, with a guidance, and offers psychological counseling. Right. Health psychology, as the name again suggests, where it needs a psychological intervention into the aspects of nutrition, diet, obesity, or various conditions that have something to do with the psychosomatic disorders of individuals. Industrial psychology is exclusive space where psychology has its own submissions, has its own contributions to understand the man and machine interaction at the workplace, and where the design and operations of machines is influenced highly by the psyche of the man. And we see that there is, if you look at any particular product, it could be a mobile phone, or it could be a machine, or it could be it could be any instrument of utility. If you see, it goes through from the origin to the existing state. It goes through several iterations of evolution in its physical dimensions, namely shape, size, appearance, the edges, the design. Why do you think it happens? Because the interaction between the man and machine is so dynamic that it calls for the change in the design, improvisation in the design of the machines, so it best fits into the psyche of an individual. So these are the aspects that are dealt with broadly in industrial psychology. Educational psychology, as the name suggests, again, it's about how you deal with the students. Well, in the Indian context, you may be aware of certain um, exclusive disciplines offered by the universities, uh, like B.Ed, B.Ed, M.Ed, bachelors in education, masters in education. So, what do you think those courses capture? It's not about the subject they teach, but then it's more about how they teach the subject, whichever subject they teach. How are you expected to handle the kids of various stages? Should there be a difference in the way you deal with a kid in third standard and a kid in ninth standard? Definitely yes. The psyche, the mental tendencies, the learning tendencies, behavioral tendencies of all these people, of all the kids through the ages from right from standard 1 to 12 is different, and hence the teachers dealing with the kids of various stages should be knowledgeable, should be trained, and should be experienced enough to understand the psyche of these kids, and hence impart the learning in the best possible way, which is dealt with in this exclusive applied branch of psychology called educational psychology. Okay, so that was a quick understanding about psychological perspectives and the various branches of psychology that it splits into, that is basic and applied areas. Okay, so that takes us into the research aspect of psychology. So, psychology, as we have seen through the various experiments, made with pizzas, made with dolls, made with movies, it's all about research and experiments. And when you say research and experiments, certain things are inevitably they gain prominence in the area. And the first thing, of course, experiment. You need to experiment, and when you experiment, certain certain components of experiment that you have to mind are variables. You have variables, like you have a variable, as you see in the picture, y is equal to 3x plus 4, which is what variable? Y is depending on x's value, or x's value is depending on y's value. As x changes, the y will change. You agree? If x is 2, y becomes 10. If x is 3, y becomes 13. So what it suggests is the value of y depends on the value of x, and hence these two variables can be understood as dependent variable and independent variable. So likewise, if you take up any experiment, any research driven experiment, you would see there are multiple variables, and each of those variables can be classified into either a dependent variable or an independent variable, right? So for instance, your performance in certain test is one variable, and your memory, your preparedness, and your intelligence is another variable. So which is a dependent variable and which is an independent variable in these two? Your score will keep changing in accordance with your preparedness. So which is depending on what? Your score is a dependent variable, and your preparedness and your memory is an independent variable, which determines as to what the score should be. So likewise, any experiment will have variables, and the variables can be broadly classified to dependent or independent. Groups, as we had discussed, there are always groups in psychological experiments, and the groups that are primary to the experiment, which are the subject of observation, which helps in drawing conclusions, like the kids that we had put in with no rewards or with rewards, who had shown a steep rise when the reward was given and a steep fall when the reward was pulled out. Such a group is referred to as the experimental group, and the other group, which was mere observed without any basic intervention, is called the control group. So any psychological group for a research experiment can be classified into these two types of groups. Likewise, so what do you derive, what do you conclude out of your experiments, is what are you trying to do with these through these experiments? You have certain expected bottom line conclusion at the end of every experiment, which you must possess right at the beginning. And all these experiments that you are conducting is either to prove that your predicted action comes true, or the predicted action does not come true, right? So this statement that you want to test is what is referred to as a hypothesis, which is not a thesis yet. It might become a thesis, which is falling short of a thesis, and hence it's called hypothesis. Say for instance, if you want to see if the engagement levels of students in a classroom are determined by the activities that the teachers offer to the students. So this is a statement. I don't know whether it is true or not, but I want to test this. So I want to split one large group into two groups. One group of students who are not given any activities, any tasks to engage themselves in the subject, and it's just a bland lecture that is going on. And another group who are engaged with tasks, challenges, activities. They might show an increased engagement levels in the subject, and hence, so what is my statement? The statement that I'm going to test here, whether engagement is driven by the way how you deal with a classroom activity. So that's my hypothesis statement, the testable statement, which I want to see whether it is true or not. If it is not true, then it turns out to be it is a null hypothesis, and if it is true, an alternative hypothesis, H0, HA. So that's about hypothesis. So my attempt as a researcher should always be to disprove the null hypothesis so that your test hypothesis stands valid. If you disprove that, the engagement levels are not rising when you don't give the activities, in other words, it suggests that the engagement levels are likely to rise when you are introducing activities in the classroom. So that's like you take a null hypothesis and you disprove that null hypothesis, so that in turn your statement of testing becomes true, right? So those are a few components we need to know from psychological research and experiments point of view. Okay, so once you conduct the research, you conduct the experiments, you gather the data. Once you have the data, you have to process the data, and some of the very basic tools of processing, evaluating the data are as you see here, testing. You put the data to test and you see whether the variables are correlating or not. What do you mean by correlation? When you say, so as we were discussing about the preparedness and the scores, is your preparedness in the subject contributing to fetching scores in the subject or not? If your preparedness If your scores are rising in accordance with your preparedness, we call the preparation and scoring as two variables which are correlated, which means a rise in one results in the rise of the other, a fall in one results in the fall of the other, right? So that's what you call as positive correlation. It could be strong in some areas or it could be weak in other areas. Likewise, what is negative correlation? Such cases where they're also correlated, um, but unlike positive correlation, the rise in one component results in the fall in the other component, and vice versa, right? So that's negative correlation. And the last image that you see where the points are scattered all across, it just means that variable one. Say for instance, if I want to see, if I want to see if the physical height of the students has anything to do with their scoring patterns, right? And I may see that it is quite possible that the hypothesis might fail to make any point through the experiment, as on the face of it, it suggests that, so it shows zero correlation. The points will be scattered all through here and there. X-axis may not have anything to do with the y-axis variable, and the points you see are scattered all around with zero correlation, right? And yeah, so all this is after the psychological testing that you do with the help of, it could be with the help of interviews or surveys, quizzes, questionnaires, or psychometric, administering the psychometric tests. All these are various possible media of rolling out a psychological test. And all these research and experiments must bear in mind that there are certain do's and don'ts, shoulds and shouldn'ts that the experimenter must bear on mind, which are captured well in the ethics, the ethical point of view. That is, when you are conducting a test, it poses minimal risk to the participant in the test, and the experimenter is expected to take a consent, a prior consent from the participant, after a due debriefing, after a due briefing about the experiment, right? The participants, or the subjects as we call, they must be duly informed, educated about the test, about the experiment, about the various consequences, about the various components of the experiment. Everything must be very, very duly informed to the participant, and the consent must be secured accordingly. After the experiment, the debriefing of the experiment must be duly given to the subject as to what has happened, what are the effects of it, and what should he know about the entire experiment. Lastly, the anonymity. If the subject wants his or her name not to be coming out through the experiment, the right to privacy must be honored, must be protected, and must be observed through the process of the experiments. Okay, so that was the first lecture in the series of lectures on psychology, where we have understood the origins of psychology, how it all started, and who are the people who contributed to the body of knowledge called psychology, what are the various initiatives, initial experiments, research that were conducted in the field, and then what are the various perspectives which contributed to understanding psychology even further, even deeper, even broader, and then what are the various domains that this subject has in due course split into by application point of view or by academic point of view, and then how it matured, it progressed further into various empirical initiatives, research, experiments, and the various measures. So that puts us in certain perspective about understanding psychology, its scope, its application, its importance. Okay, so that brings us to the close of this lecture in the series of lectures in psychology. Shall be meeting soon with another. Till then, signing off.